Hi, everyone. I'm Atara Jacobson and part of Community Mitzvah.
Atara, you're muted.
Sorry, everybody, we're back. How are you? And thank you for being part of Community Mitzvah Day and Cooking to Keep the Stories Alive. My name is Atara Jacobson. I'm one of the co-chairs of this event, along with Rachel Brandt-Greenfeld and Jerry Rothfleisch. I have with me my amazing assistant chefs. I'll just introduce you, Aliza, Eliana, Jesse. My friend Rachel is in the background, and we're so glad to be a part of this event. In the Jewish community and beyond, we repeatedly use the phrase, never forget, to ensure that the Holocaust is always on the front of our minds. Many Holocaust survivors shared their stories with the world to create a living narrative of their own experiences. And today, they, children and grandchildren, continue their stories and sharing them with the world. I'm deeply grateful that the Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West is also committed to making sure those stories are known, working with survivors and their families to ensure that their stories educate us and keep the narrative alive so that we can continue to say never forget with deep meaning. I'm honored today to introduce Becca Gallick Mitchell, the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors. Becca has combined her love of cooking with a dedication to sharing her grandmother and great-grandmother's story of survival. And today we are so excited to cook one of her grandmother's recipes, an apple cake recipe. I hope everybody has the recipe. And if you don't, put your name into the chat and we'll make sure you get it really quickly. Because this event is a community event and many of us are cooking not only for ourselves, but making cakes to give away as well as mac and cheese, we wanted to get a handle on just who is going to be donating foods today. It's okay if you're making it to keep it, please enjoy it. But if you are making additional recipes to give away, please let us know. We're going to put a poll up on the Zoom. And if you can just let us know that you're planning to share, that would be terrific. Is a poll up? Not yet. There will be a poll at some point. And when that poll comes up, if you could please let us know just what your plans are, how many cakes you're making, how much mac and cheese you're making, just so that we can let the people who are bringing the donations over to the recipients know. There will be time for Q&A at the end of today, but before then, if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. I promise you the chat will be monitored. If the question's about the recipe or even about the story itself, feel free to use the chat until we open up the Q&A lines. And with that, I am so pleased to welcome Becca. Thank you so much for being a part of today.
Thank you so much, Atara. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Jewish Federation, for having me. Thank you all for joining my cooking class. We're seeking here to nourish the body and the soul today. My name, as Atara lovely intro said, my name is Becca Gallick Mitchell. I'm a third generation Holocaust educator, recipe developer, food blogger, and the founder of Instagramma's Kitchen, a website and Instagram where I lovingly curate my family recipes. Although I am constantly developing my own original recipes, my real reason for starting Instagramma's Kitchen was as a way to share my family's most precious recipes that survived the Holocaust, so that specifically my grandma's legacy could be extended to and touch the lives of others as well. Offering this program is important to me because it connects me to and honors the legacies of my grandma Mala, who survived the Holocaust, and my great grandma Esther, who didn't. I'd like you to meet these two magnificent women. This is my grandma Mala, born Malka Weintraub. She's a Holocaust survivor. She's a role model. She is a beacon of hope, honestly, to everybody who knows her. She's 98 years old, so she's slowing down a little bit, but her recipes have sustained us for generations, in every way. It's been our tether back to who we really are as a family and as people. She is hilariously funny, although she honestly never means to be. She is so warm and so loving and truly, honestly, the best grandmother you can possibly imagine. This is my great grandma, Esther Weintraub, born Esther Ethel Reichapel. She was a very dignified, very impressive woman. Although you can't necessarily see it in this photo, she was really warm. She was such a loving, genuine mother, but just human being. She was so full of love and so generous in everything she could be, but especially her spirit. Her most important role was as a mother, and she did everything she could to keep her children safe, although only 3 of 7 reached adulthood. Today, we'll be recreating my grandma's apple cake recipe, a favored treat in her pre-war home and her home as an adult after surviving the war, especially during the high holidays, as you can imagine. So the cake itself is sweet, it's moist, it has apple in it, obviously, but it has this crumb on top that I tell you, I mean, it's the best thing about the cake. I love the cake itself. Apparently, my grandmother said that we used to make the cake all on its own. We, meaning, you know, her family, used to make the cake all on its own without the crumb, but for the life of me, I can't imagine why. Oh, sorry, I think I'm sharing the wrong. Give me just 1 second. So the ingredients for the apple cake are, we need 4 cups of flour, 3 Granny Smith apples, cored and peeled. Actually, grated is not, I don't know why I put that in there. I'm so sorry. You don't want to grate them. You just want them to be cored and peeled. 1 cup of neutral oil. I use avocado oil, but any flavorless oil would be fine. 4.5 teaspoons of ground cinnamon, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, 6 eggs, preferably at room temperature, because we're going to be whipping them up. You want them to get fluffy, and it's easier when they're not cold. 1/2 cup plus 1 tablespoon of orange juice, 5 tablespoons of unsalted butter or margarine if you're going to try to keep this parve, 2 cups of sugar, and 2 pinches of salt. The equipment that we're going to need. Oh, you know what? Before we do the equipment, preheat your ovens to 350 Fahrenheit so that it's hot by the time the cakes have to go in. So the equipment we need is either a stand mixer with the whisk attachment and also the beater attachment if you have a stand mixer. If not, a hand mixer is fine. I don't recommend whisking this on your own, but you can if you're up to the challenge. And you're going to need 2 loaf pans. I like to use glass because it's non-reactive, but any loaf pans will do. And then parchment paper or non-stick cooking spray. The non-stick cooking spray is fine, but it's going to be a lot harder to get it out of the pan. It's easier when you have the parchment to kind of just pull it right out. But the non-stick is fine. You'll just have to pre-slice it and then kind of scoop it out. But that's okay, especially if you're going to serve it sliced anyway. You're going to need a spatula and then a large and 2 small mixing bowls. The large one won't be required if you have a stand mixer, like a KitchenAid or something. And then you'll need a baking tray just so that the loaf pans have something to sit on when they're going in and out of the oven. So we're going to begin by thinly slicing the apple. So I'm going to cut it in half. I wasn't able to get the lemon juice. Oh, sorry, Shay, can you spotlight my hands, please? I wasn't able to get the lemon juice in the center of the apple, so it's a little brown, but that's a trick you can do. You can, if you're peeling apples ahead of time, you can rub them with lemon juice so that they don't brown. So we're just going to thinly slice the apple. And be as careful as you can. I like to kind of push it over to this side of the cutting board while I'm working over here. You always want to curl your fingers in so that you don't cut your fingers. So we're going to do that with all 3 apples. And if they're small apples, you can use up to 5. I like more apple in my cake, but you know, it's a personal preference. So I'm actually going to take the bowl that the apples were sitting in and just put the apples that I've sliced into the bowl. And along with the apples, you're going to toss in 1.5 teaspoons of cinnamon and 1 tablespoon of orange juice. So I'm just going to put that in now so that it's done. And then we'll just put the apples cut and into the bowl. So after we do this, we're going to whip the eggs. And I'm just kind of warning you now, it's going to be a little loud for 3 minutes. So this is just a little heads up that if you have a hard time with noises, to lower your volume. Because we're going to be having the mixer, and then I'm going to try to talk over it as much as I can. And I've tinkered around with it. There's not a really good way to mimic, to muffle the sound. So my apologies for that. So I'm just going to put the rest of this is actually not a big enough bowl. So this happens when your bowl is like really full like this. You don't want to toss things around. Sorry. You don't want to toss things around because it's just going to go all over the place. So I'm going to get a bigger bowl. And I'll use an apple to kind of smear out what's in this bowl. Okay. So just doesn't have to be fancy or perfect, but as uniformly covered as you can. Some of them are going to stick to each other. It's okay. Like I said, it doesn't have to be perfect. So I'm just going to rinse my hands. And we'll set aside these apples for later. Oh, I just need a sip of water. Give me a second. Okay. So the apple goes over here. Now, what you want to do is put the eggs and the sugar and 1.5 cups of sugar. So 6 eggs and 1.5 cups of sugar into the mixing bowl. And that's going to go on the stand mixer with the whisk attachment. And we're going to do that. I'm going to cover it to try to muffle the sound, although you'll see how well that works. and we're gonna put it on high. We've got 3 minutes of that. So, as I said before, the apple cake was really a mainstay in my grandma's childhood home. They used to make it. Oh, I'm so sorry, Shay. Can you spotlight me? So they used to make it obviously for the high holidays, but they made it for Shabbats, for other Yom Tovs, like most Ashkenazi families of the time. You know, this is a pretty popular cake. This is just our family's version of it. And it was a good life. It was a really good life. Every time they were interviewed, my grandma and her 2 sisters who'd survived would always say that they had a really good, really idyllic life. They were 7 children. So let's face it, they were not wealthy. They did not have like excess, but they didn't really want for much. They had a good life. They played outside. The boys went to yeshiva. There were 7 children. So it was, the oldest was my Auntie Franca. The second oldest was Rosa. Then my grandma Mala, who was born Malka, but they all called her Mala. And then Menashe, her brother Barish, her sisters Mindel and Lola, who died. Lola died just before the war in 1939, before the war broke out. My great-grandparents, Esther and Yoel, had a business. They were business owners, and they ran it equally. It was a scrap business, so they sold metals and glass and things that you would imagine a scrap business to sell, but they also sold fabric, szmatas, as they called it. They were living in Lodz, Poland, which was the capital of, or the textile capital of Europe. So they had a really thriving szmata business. My grandma Esther, as I call her, she's my great grandma. I call her Grandma Esther because, well, honestly, because nobody else really got to. She never got to be Grandma Esther. So sometimes it'll slip in because that's what I call her in my home. But my great grandma Esther made very elaborate meals. She always had a starting course of chicken soup with matzo balls or krepla. And then there were many vegetable courses. There were meat dishes. There were always elaborate cakes, and almost always this apple cake. So it's been just about 3 minutes. And I'd like to honor them by going back to the recipe just for a couple moments. At this stage, the eggs and the sugar will look fluffy. Now, oh, these eggs don't look fluffy. I guess I didn't do it high enough. All right, we're gonna continue to hear the stories for a couple more minutes. So they worked really hard. They held together a business and a 7-child family. My grandma Esther did the finances. She did all of the cooking and cleaning, obviously, for the home. My Papa Yoel would go to shul, and he davened every day up until the day he died. They had a really good life. They spent the summers in the country. They rented a country cottage on a farm, and they were able to give their children a good life. You know, they didn't have, like I said, they didn't have excess. But my grandma remembers always buying a new dress for the holidays and always having gifts at Purim when she would visit her grandmother and their extended family. And they grabbed life by the horns. They devoured life. They had a vibrant life. And it makes it all the more devastating knowing that it was snuffed out simply because they were Jews. It's absolutely heart-wrenching. So let's take a moment and check back on the eggs. Okay, they're looking fluffier now. Okay. So Shay, if you can just spotlight the batter for a second. See how it's a little, it's a little lighter and it's got a fluffier texture to it. So that's what we want. So I'm going to put it back on. We're going to very slowly, while the mixer is still on high, or we're going to put the mixer back on high, I should say. And then we're going to slowly drizzle in all of the oil. It's going to take about a minute to drizzle it all in. And I'm just going to turn it on high. And then we'll just have a moment to drizzle it. Okay. Now I'm gonna switch over to the beater attachment. We're gonna first add all the the last wet ingredient, which is the rest of the orange juice. And just mix it on low until that's incorporated. Okay, now I'm going to lower the bowl again, and I'm going to put in 3.5 cups of flour. So this looks more like 4 cups of flour. Okay, 3.5 cups of flour. Making as much or as little mess as you tend to. I tend to make more of a mess. Okay. And then 2 teaspoons of baking powder and a good pinch of salt. So I'm actually gonna ask you, Shay, if you could spotlight the batter again. I'm gonna show you guys what a good pinch of salt looks like. It's not a small little pinch like this. You wanna like get in there, okay? A good pinch of salt. 1. You just put it on low and mix it until the clumps only just thin out. You don't want to overmix the batter. Otherwise, you'll undo everything you did when you fluffed the eggs. So just on like number 1, the lowest you can go. We're just going to mix that for maybe 30, 45 seconds until it's just thinned out, maybe a minute. We'll have to kind of gauge it. You really don't want to overmix it. That's like the worst thing you can do. A little bit of clumps is better than overmixing. For me, it's got about 10 more seconds, and then I'm going to cut it. Okay. Let's just show you guys what that looks like. So there we go. That's the batter. Okay. Like I said, a clump here and there is better than overmixed batter. So,
Hi, Becca. We had a question in the chat. How much baking powder?
2 teaspoons.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I'm just getting as much as I can off of this. Doing not the best job of it, but that's okay. Okay, so just have a little more water. Okay, so what you do.
Wait, we had another question. Is it 3 cups of flour or 3.5 cups?
So you want 3.5 cups of flour, and then the recipe calls for 4 cups. The last half a cup is going to be the streusel. So you want 3.5 cups of flour. Okay, so Shay, could you spotlight my hands again? Or yeah, my hands now. So I'm going to show you what you do with the parchment paper. You're going to cut it to about this size of the base plus like 3 inches on either side, so that when you fold it up like so, it doesn't come too far up. Okay, and then you're going to cut out the corners like this. So that's the top corner. Here's, it might be easier to show you. Put this right here and then right here. The corner square is going to come right off. And you do that on all 4 corners with both parchment papers. Fourth corner. Okay. So that when it sits in and it protects the glass and it won't stick. You'll be able to, there are little bits in the corners that might, but when you pull it up, it'll release really nicely. So we're going to do that for the second bit of parchment paper. And then we'll continue on. So squares out of each corner. And this is a great trick if you're ever making banana bread or really anything in a square or rectangular dish. Okay, so then we'll demonstrate again. This goes in, tucks right in. What you can do if you want it to be really nice, you can fold them, but it doesn't matter because the batter is gonna kind of keep it in place. So what you do, you want to take about a quarter of the batter that you have to just, you try not to do that. I'm not always the best example because I always get it on the sides, but it's fine. There's enough batter, don't worry. And it puffs up in the oven with that baking soda and the fluffing of the eggs. So you want to cover the bottom with batter. Oh my. Oh my goodness. Okay, this is a disaster. Well, we're gonna learn what you do when that happens. So when this happens, you try to get as much out as you can, but you can kind of just use it to stick it on the side, honestly. It's still gonna release. Wet hands are a little better. Even when you make this cake a lot, it just happens. perks of a live event. Okay, so that's as much batter as you need. Now you're gonna take some apples and really generously layer them on top of the batter. You want to overlap them as well, because they're going to shrink down. And you want a good layer of apple. Okay. All right. And then you're going to do the same with the second pan. You're going to do the batter first in the bottom. And again, try not to do what I've done. I'm gonna get a different spatula. Okay. A little dot to keep it there. All right. Now, all right. A good layer on the bottom, like before. And then the apples, but you want the whole bottom to be covered. Otherwise, it won't be a nice delineation between the cake and the apple. So we're going to do what we did before, a nice thick layer. Really want the apples to be present. It is, after all, the whole point of the cake, despite what I might say about the streusel. Okay, a nice thick layer. Okay, maybe one more. We don't want batter poking through. Okay, and then again with the batter over the top. You want to leave enough so that you can do it with the other one as well. And you don't have, it doesn't have to be as thick, this layer. You just really want it to be nice and covered. And kind of smooth it out. That's like I'm doing. See? Just kind of smooth it out into the corners. And then another layer of apple. Just thin. It doesn't have to be thick, and it doesn't have to be pretty because you're not going to see it because of the streusel. But you want some apple on top as well. Okay, that's good. Now we'll do the other one. Another layer of batter before another little layer of apple. Oh gosh. I'm really demonstrating how much of a mess I am in the kitchen. All right, well, it's part of the fun, isn't it? Oh my God, did I just get it on my phone? I did. All right. That's okay. We'll have a lot to clean up after. Spread it out on top. Get as much off the spoon as you can. A little bit more in the bowl. And then we're going to layer the apple. So that just goes nicely on top or not. Okay. And one more. And then that's going to be the bulk of the cake. For the streusel, we'll wipe this. For the streusel, you're gonna need to melt your butter. So I like to just put it in the microwave for like a minute. Sometimes it doesn't need a full minute. Sometimes it just needs 30 to 45 seconds. If you cut up the butter, it's easier. And if you don't use butter right out of the fridge, it's obviously not gonna need as long. I'm just gonna try to clean up my mess that I made. Not doing the best job. Okay. All right, Shay, we don't need to look at the countertop anymore. Oh, actually, you know what? We do. So we're gonna do the streusel. Sorry, Shay, really quickly. Really making Shay work for it today. Sorry. Okay, so the sugar, the rest of the sugar, the rest of the flour and cinnamon, and we're just gonna toss that around or whisk it around. Either one's fine. Whisking's faster. And then pour the butter in. Now I like to use a fork at this point because a lot of the streusel is going to get stuck in a whisk. You just roughly toss that together until it forms clumps. And if it's a little wet, you just add a little bit more flour. Just see, just like that. Mine's a little bit wet. Okay, this is looking good. It's looking like crumbs. It's a little wet, but I don't mind it. As long as they're crumb, it's a personal preference. You can add a little bit more flour if you'd like, or not if you don't. So take half of it and put it on one cake. Just kinda covering it as much as you can. You can take some of the big crumbs and kind of break them up. The first cake's always the best because it always gets more streusel on it. So there's that. All right, and then we're gonna just put it on a baking sheet and do the other one. Crumble the streusel over the top. Oh God, can't let any go to waste. All right. And then okay, nice and even. And then we're going to pop those in the oven for an hour. So set your timer for 1 hour. And away they go. You're going to want your rack to be in the middle of the oven. So if it isn't, do that now. And then put them on that middle rack. So you're going to bake them for an hour or until a toothpick comes out clean, because everybody's oven is a little bit different. Most ovens are not calibrated properly. So, all right, Shay, I think we're done. Oh, you've done it already. Thank you. So as I make these apple cakes, there's a lot of aromas. I can't help but let these sweet cinnamon apple smells wash over me. And I'm always struck by how my grandma Mala would have probably been daydreaming about the exact same smells when she was starving in the concentration camps. She survived because she spoke German, because when she was little, she grew up in a German neighborhood. She played outside, she went to school, to public school. So she spoke German with the people in her community. It wasn't until a pogrom when she was a little bit older that they actually moved to a Jewish neighborhood in Lodz. Like I said, the summers they spent in the country, they actually rented that house on the farm from a German couple, a non-Jewish German couple in the like countryside in Poland. And they played with the kids until one summer, my Auntie Franca, the oldest, was asked to go to a party with the local children. And she went, and there were Hitlerjugend who were talking about Jews and about what they would do to them. She came home and told her parents about it, and they never went back to that farm ever again. They had large extended families on both sides of the family. So they had a lot of cousins. It was upwards of 60, 70, 80 people in the extended family on either side. The Nazis invaded right before Rosh Hashanah when my grandma was 15 years old. She went from Lodz to Kozienice, to where her grandmother had a bakery with her 3 younger siblings. Unfortunately, the bakery had already been seized, and Kozienice had turned into a ghetto. She lived there for 2.5 years. While she was living there, she learned to be a nurse. She got certified as a nurse, and she worked in a hospital in the ghetto. And one day she came across a man who had soiled himself, and he was crying for help. And she decided to clean him up. She took care of him. She made sure that he, was fed and that he was clean. And he said to her that she was going to survive the war, that nobody else had been willing to answer his cries, that everybody had left him soiled, and that she was going to survive the war and live a very long and very good life. And to this day, she still thinks that he was some sort of prophet or angel or something, because everything he said has come true. On September 26th, 1942, she came down with appendicitis. She went to the hospital. They weren't able to operate on her in that hospital. So she was transported to the hospital outside the ghetto, also in Kozienice. She had an appendectomy. And then while she was rousing from her anesthesia, she overheard in German that the nurses were saying that the Nazis were going to come and kill all of the Jews in the hospital and the ghetto. So she was still groggy. She only had on her hospital gown. She threw on her jacket that she had, and she left. She fled the hospital. She wandered into a barn and laid down because she couldn't walk anymore. Unfortunately, she had wandered back into the ghetto without realizing it. And the next morning, she was part of a roundup. By some miracle, she was sent to go to the right, to a labor camp, instead of to the left, to her death. And she went to Gorzhitsky to dig ditches for 4 or 5 weeks with a couple friends, one of whom gave her an outfit to wear, so she wasn't in her hospital gown the whole time. And then she was transported to Skarżysko-Kamienna, one of the notoriously worst labor camps, because of the treatment that the inmates withstood. They would be sleeping in bunks 5 or 6 women deep, because they didn't have enough capacity for the amount of slaves, essentially, that they had in the camp. And my grandma would always try to sleep on the top, because there were people who suffocated to death when they would sleep on the bottom of that stack. Fortunately, she was transported to Skarżysko to work in an ammunition factory called Hasag. And at that ammunition factory, she had a supervisor who was seemingly sympathetic, and her name was Gertrude Hoffman, a name we'll never forget in this family. Because my grandmother knew she was going to die of sepsis. She had worked in the hospital. She knew what was going to happen to her with this festering wound. So she approached Gertrude and she said, "I need help. I need you to help me. I'm going to die of sepsis. I have this wound. I had a surgery and I need help. And she brought her home with her. She snuck her out of the ghetto and she brought her home with her. And she bathed her and she fed her and she cared for her wounds and she tried to help her escape to Gertrude's hometown of Kessel, Germany. But my grandma was terrified. She didn't know what would happen to her in Germany, of all places, right? So she said no. She said, I've lived as a Jew, I'm going to die as a Jew, and I'm going back into the ghetto. You're going to sneak me back into the ghetto. So Gertrude did as she asked, but she always made sure that she had gauze and whatever she needed to sterilize the wounds until she healed, and she healed really well. She healed really nicely. She spent two years at Skarzisko, and then they were transferred to Czestochowa, another labor camp where there was a Hasag ammunitions factory. Gertrude made sure that my grandma was transferred with her. And it was there that she was liberated in 1945. And she testified for Gertrude on her behalf the following year in the Nuremberg trials. She was exonerated. She then met my papa in Lodz, where she would check the survivors board daily for family members. They married in September of 1945, so they didn't really hang around. And they were married by my grandma's uncle, actually, who was one of the few surviving family members of the Weintraub family. I think there were 11 in total. He lost his entire family. He was a rabbi who lost his wife and all 11 children to the gas chambers. They then moved to Germany because she found out that she had 2 surviving sisters. And then they eventually, the 3 couples, because they then married as well, they moved to America and then eventually settled in Detroit, where they found a whole community of Holocaust survivors who they could assimilate into American society with. And they were, and my grandma still is, very, very, very proud Americans. Now, actually, well, up until pretty recently, she educated students on the Holocaust. She did this in conjunction with University of Miami. And as of less than a month ago, she's now a great grandmother. So she is living her best life. And because she survived and she married my papa and gave birth to my mom, Carolyn, I'm here now, so privileged to share her testimony and her family recipes. That being said, these recipes did not originate with her. They came from her mom, my great grandma Esther, who learned them from her mom, Mindel. So great grandma Esther, she was born in Kozienice. She was a baker's daughter. She made the best challah, let me tell you. She had many, many brothers and sisters. She married at the tender age of 17, but she lucked out. She married a really wonderful, kind-hearted man, just a year her senior. So they were basically the same age. And they moved to Lodz, had 7 children, and had a good life until obviously they didn't. She had 7 children, none of whom, by the way, ever saw her without her sheitel, her makeup, her entire appearance. She would enter the, exit her bedroom looking totally perfectly coiffed. And like I said, she did all of the work for the home. She also did the finances. She was an equal partner in the business. She made elaborate meals. She was an Orthodox woman, but she was a modern woman. She was cosmopolitan. She went to the opera. She was artistic. I mean, let me just show you. She made this. Oh, that's not the right one. Although this is my grandma and papa, you can see. my gosh, I'm having a hard time sharing. I'm so sorry, guys. Okay. She made this tapestry. She painted it with oil paint and embroidered it with silk threads. And she was the kind of woman who could whip up an entire 20-person meal and make this in her downtime while raising 7 children. I mean, like, can you imagine? She was assimilated. She was very friendly with Germans, with non-Jews, until it became dangerous. In September of 1939, she panicked. She absolutely panicked. She took her 4 youngest children, including my grandma, who was 15. So she thought she would be able to kind of be in charge. And she took them to her mom's. She didn't hear back from her husband for weeks. So she went back to Lodz to be with him. Unfortunately, Lodz turned into a ghetto in February of 1940. And she had to really get creative when she, was tasked with feeding her family. She made stocks out of scraps and potato peel latkes. And she had to get creative with some kohlrabi because that's like the only thing that they had at the time in the ghetto, even though it was rationed. She had to maximize what she had to sustain her family. After surviving over 4.5 years in the squalid conditions of the ghetto, she was transported with her husband and her 2 older daughters to Auschwitz. The journey was abysmal. There were 200 people crammed into a cattle car the size of a small kitchen or bathroom. And people died on the journey, but couldn't even drop to the ground because they were packed like sardines. There were no toilets. Everybody was disgusting. It was filth. It was probably the worst way you could spend your last few days on this earth. Great Grandma Esther was taken off the train car and lined up in a line. Her 2 daughters were terrified. They were young adults at the time, but they were scared and they wanted their mom. And they clutched to her arm, one on either side. And they were yelling out to her, "Mommy, mommy," And it's why they think that she was, sent to the gas chambers. My Auntie Rosa was sent to the left. My great grandma Esther was sent to the right, and my Auntie Franca was sent to the left. And they don't know why other than that. She was 41 years old. She took very good care of herself. She was very capable and strong, and she could have been used for work, and they decided no. And although most of the mothers were taken to the gas chambers because they had like little children, we think that she was sent to the gas chambers to make it easier because she appeared to be so dedicated to her daughters. So in her last moments, that's what she demonstrated to be true about her. So just for a moment, let's go back. Sorry. Shay, can you see my Grandma Esther? I'm sorry, my screen share isn't working on my end.
Let me try on mine.
I'm so sorry. Sorry, guys, bear with me just for a second. Okay, I think I can do it now. So let's go back to the photo. This is the only photo that we have of my great grandma Astor. And I really agonized over whether or not I should share this photo. Like I said, she never emerged from her bedroom to see her children without her sheitel on. Yet, as you can see, that's her hair. This photo actually we have because they needed an identification photo in the ghetto. So she was actually forced to take this photo. And the Nazi who supervised Heinrich Ross, the photographer, also an inmate in the ghetto, he forced her to take off her sheitel as a way of dehumanizing her and humiliating her. And, you know, on one hand, she didn't even want her children to see this, you know, to see her like this. But on the other, it gives a more compelling and relatable story with potentially more impact. And I didn't really know what to do. So I asked my grandma, as the only person who's still living who knew her, you know, to speak on her behalf. What would she want me to do? And she said that she would want me to share it because she died ultimately just because she was a Jew. And that wasn't the only thing about her. So if we can bring her back to life in people's minds in any way, shape, or form, we should do that. So now knowing the context, maybe a woman who seemed cold before now seems strong. She has her nostrils flared, her lips are tight. Her piercing stare is presumably directed at the Nazi forcing Heinrich Ross to take this photo. And you know what strikes me? She didn't look down. She is so exposed in this moment, and she is probably full of maybe embarrassment or certainly vulnerability, right? But she chose fierce defiance. I couldn't be more proud of her. Her legacy ultimately lives on because she made the kind of impact that demanded remembrance. I'm going to show you the three sisters. This is from left to right. This is Auntie Franca Charlepsky, Auntie Rosa Schomburg, and my grandma Mala Dorfman. And as you can see, they spent a lot of time in the kitchen together, and always in the kitchen, and always looking like this. Can you imagine like cooking like this with your jewels and your hair coiffed and the lipstick and the, you know, it's like they really, in everything they did and everything my grandma still does and who she is and who they were, they embody their mom. You know, she made such an indelible impact. So she does live on. And as I'm smelling the aromas wafting from my oven right now, she's really living on. So let me just, obviously we don't have the kind of time to be able to do this together, take the cakes out of the oven together, but I'm going to show you a cake that I made yesterday. And Shay, if you could just show my hands again. I'm going to, Paul, could you just get me a plate, please? Thank you so much. So this is what it looks like on the inside. I'm gonna actually, it's a little hard to cut through the crumb. It's a little sad, but it's, as you can see, a very delicious, moist cake. Not the prettiest slice. But here you can see the layer of apple. It's really in there. And I'm just gonna have a little bite because I really can't resist. Oh my goodness. Wow. You forget how good it is. So when I recreate these recipes, I'm really grasping for the flavors and the aromas of Grandma Esther's kitchen. You know, I want to bring them into my own and now into yours as well. So in our own way, we're doing the mitzvah of bringing her back to life. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for helping me to honor my family's legacy today. Thank you.
Thank you, Becca. That was amazing. And I don't know if you can see back here, but I made mine yesterday and it's almost gone. So big fans in the house. Thank you so much for sharing what a moving story of your grandmother and your extended family. My name is Rachel Brandt Greenfeld, and I am one of the co-chairs of this program, Cooking to Keep the Stories Alive. And as the granddaughter myself of Holocaust survivors, I'm so moved and honored to have heard you speak today. That picture that you put up of your grandmother and great aunts is, we have many pictures very similar to that as well, of my grandmother and her two surviving sisters, and it just brought back all the memories. It's important, as important now as the next generation moving forward, to continue to tell the stories so that they're not forgotten. And I know that there are some questions coming up, and I will get to those shortly, but first we have two teens who participated in the program today, and I know they want to share some words as well about how impactful it is for them to hear these stories. So I'm going to start with Dina Drogan, and then we will go with Sadie Munoz.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dina Drogan. First of all, thank you all for coming. It means a lot to both me and Sadie and many others. And thank you, Becca, for this amazing recipe and story. And Jamie, Stacy, Shay, Rachel, Elise, Jerry, and Atara. And hopefully I'm not forgetting anyone, but thank you all for helping put together this amazing event. This event is extremely important to me as I'm also the great-granddaughter of a Holocaust survivor, and Holocaust education is something I'm very passionate about in my daily life. And I find it really scary when I read new facts about Holocaust denial and its growth in recent years. And I think hosting and attending events like these and seeing turnouts like this really helps keep the stories alive, as per the name. And I encourage all of you, especially all of the other teenagers on the Zoom right now, to share Becca's grandmother's story. And if you have any of your own, whether that be to your friends or other family, or even at school, because as teenagers, we are the future of the Jewish community. And I feel like we do have a responsibility as we're getting older to continue to share these stories. So again, thank you so much for coming. And I think Sadie might have some things to say as well.
Thank you all again for coming, and Becca, thank you so much for your story. I just want to say that this event is really important to me because I want to help pass down survivor stories. Remembering their history will help us to never forget the past. And I plan to share the story with my friends and family as I get older. And especially the little tidbits that Becca added about the recipe, I think will be really memorable. So thank you again, everyone.
Okay, great. I'm going to start just reading through the Q&A chat. If I remember correctly, and Shay or Jamie, correct me if I'm wrong, I think people can also unmute and ask questions. But the first question that came up here was, how much sugar goes into the streusel? I'm a bit confused. I put 2 cups of sugar into the batter.
Okay, so 1.5 cups go into the batter, but 2 cups in the batter will be perfectly fine. Don't worry about it. Just put 1/2 cup into the streusel.
Okay, thank you. We have a lot of thank yous. I'm not going to pronounce last names incorrectly, but Karen said, thank you so much. This was powerful and delicious. So I thought that was a nice one. A lot of thank you so muches. Beautiful story. Mia Schwartz says she's also a 3G. and it's wonderful to hear your story. And she's doing this with her teen daughter. Thank you for sharing your family's story. It was a moving experience to share this hour with you, Becca. Elise Shane Brown asks, what drove you to share your grandmother's story? Have you and or your grandmother returned to Poland?
So, oh gosh, my grandmother's story. I didn't actually think that I could share this story. I never really shared it until I was asked to do it for a Yom HaShoah service for my synagogue. And I realized that but I guess because I care so deeply about it, I was able to overcome my fear of public speaking and performance in some way, shape, or form. And I realized that, if I can do it, I should do it. And as far as Poland's concerned, I would love to go to Poland. I have not personally been. My grandmother went, I think it was 2 years before I was born, with my mom and my dad and my mom's 2 siblings and their spouses. So they did go to Poland. My grandfather went too. They toured, they went to see where my grandmother grew up. They saw where my grandfather was in hiding because he survived for the majority of it in hiding. But I have not been fortunate enough to go yet, no, unfortunately.
Thank you. Jamie wants to know, what does your grandmother think about today's world of growing anti-Semitism?
Oh, she thinks it's a shanda. I mean, I think she's disheartened. I think that is part of why I do what I do, because I think she is so disheartened, and it's heartbreaking to see her like that. And she and my grandfather and their generation, and then my mom's generation, has put so much work and so much soul and effort and love and heart into Holocaust education, and they don't feel that they're seeing the return on that investment as much as we would hope to. So I think, sharing our culture is really important, and showing people what Jewish joy is and what Jewish life is, and the most vibrant aspects of our community and our culture. I think it's what I try to do to humanize us to groups who might want, our demise.
Yeah, thank you. Atara is curious, are there other recipes that have made it to your family table? Recipes that your cousins make, that you or your cousins make?
So, oh gosh, there's a laundry list. This is just one. Yeah, we have tons. We have a few cakes. We've got 3 different cookie recipes, but the majority of them are savory. We've got a chicken soup. We've got kreplach. We've got matzo balls, but I'll be honest, I use the box. I do add schmaltz. But yeah, no, we've got kugel, so many recipes, meat recipes, veg recipes. It's a wealth of recipes.
Awesome. Stacy says, thankfully your grandmother is still alive. What has your reaction been? Let me start over. Thankfully your grandmother is still alive. What has her reaction been to you sharing her story this way with recipes?
Oh gosh, she is, Nachas doesn't really cover it. She is so proud, but I think she's relieved that she's going to live on no matter what. And that, this effort will, pass on through generations. And she said to me probably one of the nicest things anybody's ever said to me was, she said that I'm basically I'm her sister. What I'm doing is basically doing what a daughter would do for their mother, meaning what I'm trying to do for my great grandma Esther is, bringing her back to life. She thinks is the biggest mitzvah, and she feels that in doing so, I'm like a sister, not like a granddaughter. So that was one of the nicest things anybody's ever said to me.
And it looks like the last comment here is, can't see. I'm a 2G with my son who is a 3G. This is Taya Friedman. It's hard to tell someone else's story, but you did it very well. Thank you so much for sharing her story with us and keeping it alive.
Oh, thank you.
And are there any other questions? If not, then I think we will switch over to Jerry.
Sorry, I was unmuted. Becca, thank you so much for sharing your story and your great grandmother's story and your family story with all of us. It truly was an honor to listen to your family stories, to share your recipe with us, with all of us. Your grandmother and your great grandmother in such an unbelievable, amazing way. I am confident that yours is a story that we will all continue to tell. My name is Cheryl Fleisch, and I'm a co-chair for this program along with Rachel and Atara. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We know how to be hearing the stories of the holiday and continue. With that said, I would like to make a personal request of each of you. Becca's family story to
Jerry, we're losing connection. You're actually frozen.
and
We're not hearing you and you're frozen. Sorry.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And we look forward to so many more programs like this in the future. Thank you.